Welcome to the podcast. It's Monday. We're going to talk some NASCAR with Rod Mullins, and Rod is still recovering from a busy weekend in Bristol at the Bristol Motor Speedway. And Rod, the big news this weekend, somehow Kyle Larson did not win all three races. I just can't believe it. What's wrong with Kyle Larson? He finished second in one of the races. What a weekend for Larson. That's just unbelievable what he was able to do.
Yeah, I know it was incredible what he did. He was trying to go for the triple, the trifecta, so to speak. And on Friday night, it just didn't work out for him. He still came in second in the truck race, but still he had a good truck. I mean, there was no doubt about it. But Saturday turned around, he dominated in the Xfinity race, and then on Sunday turns right around and does the same thing in the Cup race. And I guess it was probably something that was kind of pushing him to some degree or another, and that was probably the loss of John Edwards. And John Edwards was the PR exec who worked at Hendrick Motorsports. He worked at Fox Sports for a short period of time, but then he came back to Hendrick. As a matter of fact, when all of this stuff happened with Kyle Larson and the iRacing situation, where he made a derogatory racist statement during that broadcast. Somebody, took the time at least to look at him and say, I still think Kyle Larson has got a chance in this sport. And Rick Hendrick was the one that took the chance on him because, he ended up losing his ride with that one. And then on top of that, you had John Edwards who came in. John Edwards had worked with Jeff Gordon for years and years and years. And he looked at him and he said, I think we've got the potential to be able to restore this kid's career. And sure enough, that's what they did. And John Edwards was just a legend in the infield in the motorsports community for his work in PR. And I never had a chance to meet him. I've heard a lot about him and so forth. But this weekend was pretty heavy on Kyle Larson's heart, especially. And he dedicated the win. Matter of fact, dedicated both of the wins this past weekend at Bristol to the memory of John Edwards.
So as I'm following along as the weekend goes on and Rod's reporting back to us about the action going on, when I read your story after seeing the race on Friday night and you wrote about how well Kyle was going for three wins in three nights and I'm thinking that's just crazy. I mean, because it's not like a baseball team where there's only one other team in the stadium and you got to beat that other team and sweep
Right.
them. There's between 30 and 40 other drivers out there in each of these races, and every team is out there going for blood. And I mean, everybody's working so hard to win these races. And so to think that one guy could even think of winning three races in
Yeah.
one weekend, and then he goes out, he finishes a close second, he wins on Saturday, and on Sunday, okay, to top it all off, he leads 411 of 500 laps. I
Hmm.
mean, it's not like he, edged his way to victory a couple times and got lucky and got second. This was dominant racing from a
Yeah.
guy for three straight nights.
Yeah, it was. For three straight nights, it was dominant. There was no doubt about it. And he had the car that was dialed in. He says he loves Bristol, although he hated it when they put dirt down on the track here a couple of years ago. And he says, I hope we never go back to that. He's clearly shown why he feels that Bristol's one of his favorite tracks. He won in the fall last year. And then, of course, he continues this spring. But, with that, is going to open up a can of worms with this whole thing about the dominance sort of thing. I know that there's people probably walking away from this race saying, well, it wasn't even worth going to the race to see Kyle Larson dominate in this entire race because it was just, I just don't like it. This isn't Bristol to me. And you have to understand that Bristol is a unique track in and of itself. If you get a car dialed in at Bristol and you're able to do what Kyle Larson did on Saturday and Sunday, damn, you're a great driver. I mean, damn, you've got a great race team. I'm just going to be honest about it. That's what the sport is all about. It was strategy also. And, I preach this over and over. We haven't even talked about the tire situation because on Saturday, the teams were scared to death. I know I was kind of wondering, oh my God, are we in for another Sunday race like we had last year when the tires disintegrated at 40 and 50 laps and they had to go and change and get extra tires? Goodyear had to give them extra tires. Based upon practice on Saturday, it was almost a foregone conclusion. We were going to have a situation on Sunday that could have very well I don't know, tainted the race that much more towards some of the fans at Bristol. They would have been wondering, well, what in the heck's going on here and so forth. But Sunday ended up being I guess, one of the most beautiful days you could ever imagine. Temperature was just right, and that tire dialed in. And that tire, when it got dialed in, it provided a lot of traction for these guys, especially going over that traction compound. It helped them out a little bit. Kyle Larson wasn't too lucky, though. There toward the very end, he brushed the wall at least two or three times, I think, right in the final laps. He was getting up on the high side a little bit and brushed it as he was coming out of the turns. He's lucky he did not come away with did not finish with about 3 or 4 laps to go. But I guess when you've got all that you can possibly give and get out of your car, that's what's going to end up happening. But still, he was dominant any way you look at it.
Denny Hamlin finished second. Denny had come in. He had come into the race having won the last two NASCAR races. He's 2.25 seconds back. It sounds close, but at Bristol, that can be an eternity.
Right.
Ty Gibbs third, 6.679 seconds behind. Only 9 drivers finished on the lead lap, but that's not unusual at Bristol. It's a .533 mile track. So, what do you think about Hamlin and Gibbs and what they were able to do? They were at least in shouting distance there at the end.
Right. Well, for Hamlin, I didn't expect any less from him and so forth. He had a good car. He had it dialed in. It just wasn't enough to be able to overcome Kyle Larson. I think the surprise out of the whole thing was Ty Gibbs. Ty Gibbs has had a horrible season up until this point, and he finished in the top five for the first time. And how many races are we into now? 8 or 9 races so far on the season. So he finished with a top five. That has been just an incredible accomplishment for this young man who has just had all sorts of trouble, even going back to last year. It was kind of like a monkey had been thrown off their back with this race. But, it's just one race. We'll see what happens when they go to Talladega here in 2 weeks. We'll see if he's able to hold it together or not. But, Denny Hamlin, I didn't expect any less from him on the track. He's a short track racer. He's won at Bristol before, won the spring race last year with it. He had been on a hot streak here, had won a couple of races. Kyle Larson just, made the comment in post race comments. He made the statement that said, well, we broke Denny's win streak here, and well, good enough. I'm glad we did and stuff because we had it all dialed in. So, but it's a good race for those guys overall. They needed something like that. Chevrolet was dominating this race at one point before the Toyotas came from nowhere and then started contending toward the very end. But still, like you said, between 2 and 5 seconds off, from what the pace was, and then 9 cars only on the lead lap at the end of the race. At one point, there was only one car on the lead lap. These guys managed to get their laps back, so that tells you something about Bristol that, if you can drive it, you're able to do such things. And some of these guys were able to get back on the lead lap toward the very end.
We talk about the dominant race of Kyle Larson. He led 411 laps, but Alex Bowman, the pole sitter, he dominated the early stage of the race. He led the first 39 laps. Larson took the lead, and Bowman actually was second in stage two, but his race ended early with engine failure.
Yeah.
Disappointing day considering he had led so much early.
Yeah, it was kind of like another one of those things of the monkey on the back sort of thing with Alex Bowman, because people start talking about Alex Bowman and they start thinking, hey, look, he's not producing wins. He's not producing, top qualifying marks in this sport. And then here he goes and surprises everybody at Bristol and takes the pole. He had a great car. It went on there but it makes me wonder too, how lucky Kyle Larson was toward the very end, being able to hold that car together because, it comes out of the same shop, Hendrick Motorsports. And here these engines were. Chase Elliott, really not much of a contender all day, although he ran up close to top 10 several times during the race. I really have to say that that engine failure by Alex Bowman tainted what could have been a very good day for him altogether. And when he dropped that cylinder and then started puffing out blue smoke toward the latter half of that engine getting ready to expire, you knew something was going to happen. And I kind of just sit there when he radioed in and he said, I'm just not getting the power. They could tell it on the telemetry. They knew he dropped a cylinder, and then it was before long. It was just wait and see. Just get as many laps in as you can. Let's just see what happens. And then the engine expired. That's what ended up happening for Alex Bowman.
Looking at the points for the season, we're 9 races in now. William Byron maintains the lead at the top with 346 points. Just really consistent. He's actually second in laps led to Kyle
Hmm.
Larson, but Larson has the one DNF. Christopher Bell, who has 3 wins this season. Larson has 2 wins this season, by the way. Christopher Bell with 3 wins this season. He is in third. Denny Hamlin with 2 wins is in second. Chase Elliott rounds out your top five. It's a lot of guys bunched up there at the top. A lot of familiar names up there at the top. And so we're 9 races in now, and we've kind of seen a little bit on all kinds of tracks, super speedways, the mile and a halves. Now with Bristol, we've seen a short track race. We can
Hmm.
kind of get a feel a little bit for how things are going to go this season with these teams.
Yeah, I think so. And we're going to get our return trip to, or I should say, our turn now at the big super speedway with Talladega here in 2 weeks. They've already had Daytona. They have, at least worked on Daytona a little bit, but Talladega is a different beast altogether. They'll be going there the here in 2 weeks, and we'll get to see what kind of strides they're making with this car, where they've come from, with where they were at the beginning of the season with Daytona. We'll get to see what's going on with that one. But yeah, we've had a taste of the short tracks, Martinsville, Bristol. I want to call Phoenix in there, just another one of those short tracks. But then we've also had your Daytonas in there, your Atlantas. It's been an interesting season so far. I don't think a lot of people expected Christopher Bell to rattle off 3 wins because this season a lot of people were looking at Joe Gibbs as still in a rebound sort of way from last year. They just did not have a good season, with the exception of Denny Hamlin there toward the very end. But I think a lot of people were kind of scratching their head, wondering whether or not this team was going to finally rebound, and they have. And now it's just a matter of who's going to be dominant on the high banks and that super speedway at Talladega here in 2 weeks, because this could make or break a lot of these teams going into. Well, we're a quarter of the way through the season right now, is the way it stands, and this sets the stage for this next quarter of what we're going to have before we get to the halfway point. And we'll just have to wait and see what all's going to take place. Two big tracks, Talladega, and then let's not forget Charlotte either, coming up in at the end of May. That's going to be the two telling tracks, so to speak, of how the season is going to be going for some of these guys.
And the next time, so Bristol, of course, has the fall race. But
Right.
we'll have Bristol has something in between, and there you were there for the media. You were in the media room all weekend, and there was a lot going on. And among the things that were going on, you got to talk a little baseball, I believe,
Yep.
yesterday.
I do.
That looked like fun from the picture you sent me.
It was. It was funny too when Johnny Bench's cell phone goes off right in the middle of my question, or right after I finished my question. He said, "Hold on." Then he had to look at his phone. He said, "Well, it's 5 o'clock somewhere," and just completely, it was almost like it. I'm glad I got the question out because he kind of threw me off with it. But no, Johnny Bench was there. He was one of the co-grand marshals of the race, to give the command for the drivers to start their engines, along with Bob Kessling, who was the voice of the Vols. Sadly, didn't get a chance to talk with Bob Kessling. They were trying to get him into the media room, and I don't know if he didn't want to come to the media room, or he had too many other responsibilities going on. But Johnny Bench came in at about 1 o'clock on Sunday afternoon, and he just had a great sit down. I got to know this guy a whole lot more, a lot better than the little scholastic book that I bought back in grade school that was only about this thick, and it told the story of Johnny Bench coming from Dinger, Oklahoma, Binger, Oklahoma, and his rise into superstardom as a catcher for the Cincinnati Reds. I got a chance to at least get a grasp from him of what he thought, and I don't know if some people thought that there was going to be a question asked about Pete Rose or anything like that. Everybody stayed away from that. My big question was to him, um, is it a popularity contest or is it an actual look at stats when it comes down to voting someone into the Hall of Fame? And I gave him an example, and I gave him two Cincinnati Reds players who were on the top five in Reds.com and a lot of other people's books of where they rank them at as two of the best players that have never been considered, or at least been really seriously considered for the Hall of Fame. And that is Vada Pinson and also Dave Concepcion. And I got an answer from Johnny Bench that was kind of like, I can just say it this way. He didn't say it. I'm putting this word in right here, how I say it. I think a lot of it has to do with politics and how you present yourself to the committee, or how the committee relates to you and looks at you. I don't know if you could come up with anybody any better than Dave Concepcion and also Vada Pinson out of those two. But I think it's a travesty that they're not in the Hall of Fame right now, in the Cooperstown being, honored for their contribution to baseball. Johnny Bench gave the answer, though. He said a lot of it had to do with, and this was an answer that was kind of out there also that was kind of separate, but he said that a lot of the guys that have been judged and looked at here have been the ones that went from the National League over to the American League or back. And, it's like an entirely different way of looking at how they, contributed to their career and so forth. He gave me a very long answer, and I've got an article to be coming up here pretty soon on Johnny, talking to him about that. And I even went over to him yesterday. He kind of looked at me real funny when I asked him the question, because I think there were a lot of people that asked him, "Hey, who's your favorite driver? Who's this?" And he likes Richard Petty. He came down with Richard Childress. He's been to the races before at Bristol. I think 2014 was the last time he was down there. And, he was talking about he loves the racing, loves this idea of the Speedway Classic. He says it's just incredible that they're going to put a baseball field inside of the infield there at Bristol Motor Speedway. And I went up to him afterwards. They were going over and looking at the AI rendering on the wall that they have in the media center. And pardon the pun, and especially with Johnny, I told him, I said, "Hey," I said, "it's really great to talk to you." I said, "I hate throwing a curveball at you like that, but still, I had to ask that question." He said, "No, that's fine, and stuff." Really nice guy. He's opinionated. He's got his opinions about things, but hey, he's got a right to. He's in the Hall of Fame. He's considered one of the finest catchers, one of the greatest catchers that's ever played the game. Rightly so. He deserves that. He deserves that honor out of that, no doubt.
He got to rub elbows, so to speak, with two Hall of Famers yesterday. You with Johnny Bench. Now you got to talk to Johnny Bench.
Yeah.
I
Hmm.
was at the Orioles Blue Jays game in Camden Yards, sitting in section 34, row 7, and in section 34, row 1 was Cal Ripken Jr. And I'll give Cal some credit because that game kind of lingered on for a while. Started at 1:30. Baseball in this day and age with the pitch clock goes a lot quicker. Saturday's game, we were there. It went about 2 hours, 20 minutes. Sunday was over 3 hours before we went to extra innings.
Hmm.
We played one inning of free baseball. Cal was there the whole day. He's not a
That's great.
celebrity type who jumps in, sits down for a couple innings, and leaves. He was there with a group of people, and I'll say this too for Baltimore fans, a lot of respect in the sense that that's Cal Ripken. He broke Lou
Hmm.
Gehrig's record, and there was not a long line of people coming up and pestering him between innings. Folks left Cal be Cal, and Cal was just another fan sitting there in the crowd. And I mean, he was in the front row.
Yeah.
He had the one of the best seat in the house. But no, that was interesting. I mean, so I didn't go bother him either. I mean, that's Cal. You leave Cal alone.
Hmm.
And so that's Cal Ripken and Johnny Bench. You got to make of a good baseball team there with the guys we were hanging out with yesterday.
Yeah, and I look at. I think I mentioned this to you and stuff about Cal Ripken in our message when we were kind of going back and forth yesterday at the race. Um, Cal Ripken to me is baseball. I mean, he's just up and up. The Ripken family, even though, yeah, I think you had Billy that didn't do as well maybe as Cal did and so forth. And Cal Sr., I believe, didn't he do some managing for a little while and
He was
stuff?
the manager of the
Just
Orioles for several years.
yeah,
Yeah.
manage them and so forth. And he had a lot of pressure on him. But I'm telling you, Cal Ripken is baseball. That's just the way I look at it. It's not just I throw all my eggs into one basket and just say Pete Rose was baseball. No, Pete Rose was part of it. Johnny Bench was part of it. Cal Ripken was part of it. And I don't dislike Cal Ripken at all. It's sort of like going back to when I was younger. A lot of people didn't like some of the players on the Orioles and so forth. I absolutely thought the world of Brooks Robinson when he was playing baseball. Just an overall, never had a chance to meet the guy, but my gosh, he was just such a great ambassador for the sport. That's what I thought about it. Same thing with Cal Ripken. Cal Ripken's got a facility down in the Smokies. Cal Ripken Jr.'s Cal Ripken's baseball experience, and they give a chance for these little league teams and some of these summer league teams to go down and play in tournaments down in the Pigeon Forge Gatlinburg area, and they say it's a super time for all these teams involved because they say that all these teams are treated as though they're like Major League Baseball teams when they go down there. And that's the way that these kids should be made to feel, hey, you're playing an important sport. You're doing something that's great out here and we're recognizing you for it. And, I'm glad to say that, Cal Ripken, I don't think Cal Ripken's let that and his experience in baseball kind of go south on him or go sour or anything. He loves the sport. You can clearly tell he's brought up, he's royalty. He's royalty of the sport as far as I'm concerned.
Bench too, we're both guys of a certain age, the 70s and 80s baseball, especially 70s baseball.
Mm-hmm.
Now money is such a big part of it. Money was then too, but not to the degree it is now. Now the Dodgers buy they buy an all-star team and put them out there and see what they can
Mm-hmm.
do. Small market teams like the Reds and Orioles were dominant in the 70s. The big red
Yep.
machine of the Reds and I mean the Oakland A's also in that time, another small market team. The Orioles had those great pitching staffs,
Mm-hmm.
Brooks Robinson, like you mentioned, Eddie Murray, their own no-hit shortstop who was a great fielder, Mark Belanger.
Mm-hmm.
It was great to see, and that's what I grew up with. You mentioned Cal Ripken Jr. being baseball. Johnny Bench was baseball in a lot of ways to me.
Yeah.
I don't know if you remember this show. You might. I think you're a couple years older than me. But in the early 80s, Johnny Bench was the host of a TV show for kids called The Baseball Bunch.
Yes, I do. I
You remember
remember it
that?
well.
I
Yes, I
remember
do.
they had Tommy Lasorda as the Great Wizard, and they had some other. They would have a guest on each week, but Johnny Bench was the mythical coach of this little group of kids who they
Mm-hmm.
wanted to learn baseball, and they learned how to the proper way to bunt, how to make that play at third base when the guy. When it's a slow roller on the grass, you got to pick it up and throw it across a diamond. I learned baseball a lot watching Johnny Bench in the baseball bunch. So he's part of those memories for me from baseball from the earliest ages for me remembering baseball.
Well, and I have to say this too. I was really surprised when I was younger. My parents bought me the Johnny Bench hitting experience. And it was a steel rod put down into, you had to pour concrete into this mold. And then the concrete had to sit there and it had to set and it had a rubber band or a spring on it and it had a baseball and you had to pretend like you were standing in the batter's box and then you would hit this ball or try to hit it and then that spring would come back and depending on how you hit it, how hard you hit it, the thing would either come back fast at you and it would give you anticipation of what you were going to be trying to hit at and so forth. It only stayed in one area though. You could adjust it, but it only stayed in one area. So it was that sweet spot, what you were looking for that perfect pitch. That's what it looked like. And I remember having that. I remember, like I said, having the Scholastic book about Johnny Bench. I even had, I think it was, I ordered a Reds home jersey, the white jerseys with the red trim on it from Sporting News back when they had the order section. You could go in there, pick out your jacket, pick out your jersey and everything. And to this day, I've still got that jersey. As a matter of fact, my son wore that jersey when he was in school. Loved that jersey. And so, the Reds were something back in the 70s that it just they were just a team. I mean, back to back, 75 and 76, beating the Red Sox, then beating the Yankees. It was an accomplishment in and of itself. And I would have loved to have been able to sit down and talk with him a little bit more, but he was in such a hurry yesterday. I mean, you're being shuffled from all these different things and stuff. But Johnny Bench, he was just as down home as you could possibly get. And He even pecked on my shoulder when he walked in. I turned around, and looked at him, and pecked on my shoulder. He said, "How you doing?" And I hadn't even said the first question to him. He's that kind of, he's that kind of persona, has that kind of persona about him, and shook his hand. Oh my gosh, when I shook his hand yesterday after I asked him the one and told him the pun about sorry I threw you the curveball, his hand was massive.
Oh yeah, yeah.
His hand was massive. And I go back to think, oh my God, my hand is just so small. And then I look back to the picture of Johnny Bench holding something like so many balls in his hands,
Yeah,
like that. And
yeah.
I'm
I've seen
like,
that picture. Yeah, yeah.
it's no wonder. It's no wonder my hand felt like a dwarf in his hand when I put it in there. I mean, he's all around. He's just a great guy all around.
Well, it's great, a great experience for you to be able to do that. I mean, you're there to cover NASCAR, and then all of a sudden, you're a kid who grew up idolizing Johnny Bench, the Cincinnati Reds. I know you've been a big Cincinnati Reds fan your whole life, and
Mm-hmm.
then you get a chance to talk with him. He's pecking you on the shoulder. I mean, Scott German, one of our co colleagues here at AFP, gets to do some of those kind of things from time to time with his O's guys. He's an O's fan since he was a kid.
Mm-hmm.
It's one of those neat things about being a sports writer. You get to do some really cool things. And I'm sure, I mean, in addition to covering the racing this
Yeah.
weekend, getting to talk to Johnny Bench has got to be a top, it's
Well,
got to be on your list there of all time great things you've been able to do.
it is, and Johnny Bench brought up something too that kind of made me think. And when I talk about the politics of the Hall of Fame and how things are done, he threw it back into my lap, sort of. Although I'm not a voter, I don't vote or anything like that, and he threw it back in our lap, and he kind of said to us, he said, who's the people that's responsible for putting these people up in the Hall of Fame? He said, well, the writers are. The writers are the ones that, if they either like you or they don't like you, one way or the other is kind of the way it comes down to. I don't see how you can't like Dave Concepcion. I don't see how you can't like Vada Pinson out of this whole thing of their careers and so forth. But Johnny Bench gave me the example of how much power some of us in this field that we're in, what kind of power some of us have, and what they do sometimes to go and what could greatly affect maybe a hitting title, so to speak. He gave me the example of Ted Williams and Joe DiMaggio, and two Boston writers absolutely refused to vote for DiMaggio in the hitting title that year, even though I think Ted Williams maybe won it or something like that. I forget which one it was, but he brought that up. And I remember that being addressed at one point or another about, hey, there was this little tiff with sports writers and so forth on the Ted Williams, Joe DiMaggio thing. And the sports writers held a lot of power at that point. I kind of think that in some ways, maybe the fans ought to have a little bit more say in it. The sports for us, we go out and enjoy the sport and so forth. And yeah, we've got some people that's in the Hall of Fame, but there's others that deserve it. And Johnny Bench was not one of these people that went and said, I was so great and I did all this and stuff. He started naming off names from those teams back in 75 and 76 of the players that contributed. And Merv Retman was one of them. Gosh, I can remember having 10 Merv Retman baseball cards, and I didn't know what to do with them because I'd never heard of the guy that much. But he said he came in and he played in important places the same way that Bill Plummer did as the backup catcher. He said Bill Plummer, as far as he was concerned, needed to be in the Hall of Fame. And he said technically he is because the Reds are there and so forth as world champions. But he said stat wise, he said he didn't have hardly anything compared to what I did, and that's because he was a backup catcher. But he said he still contributed all sorts of, ways to the Cincinnati Reds. He said they were just a team. They were not individuals. They were a unit. They were a team back in 75 and 76.
When I look at the Hall of Fame numbers for both Vada Pinson and Dave Concepcion, Pinson has a much better case. He's back. He's eligible again in 2025 with the whatever they call it now. The Veterans Committee it used to be called
Mm-hmm.
they probably have a more politically correct name for that now. But
Yeah.
he's eligible again this year actually to be voted in. So we'll see with him. Concepcion and it's funny his career when I looked it up, his career peak in the voting total with the Baseball Writers Association of America was just 15.7%. I'm not even seeing I've found a couple of numbers for Concepcion. His highest that I've seen is 11.3%.
Hmm.
His case may be tougher, but his he won two Silver Sluggers, he won five Gold Gloves, he was
Hmm.
the anchor of that big red machine. So those are things in his favor. Certainly a lot of Pinson's probably more likely.
Yeah.
He looks like a guy that it'd be hard to keep out. Um, in the next couple of years with the Veterans Committee that I'll call it that just because that's what it's always been called. Um,
Hmm.
but when you mentioned that Johnny Bench said who's responsible for this, it's the writers. For years, I voted with gosh, I've got ACC ballots, for ACC football and basketball, and I'm a member of the Football Writers Association of America, the National College Basketball and College Baseball groups as well, and I get votes
Hmm.
for those teams. I don't vote. I haven't voted for a few years because it became clear to me that at least in my opinion, I didn't think other writers took it as seriously as I did. I mean, for me, if I'm going to vote for these teams, I'm going to do a deep dive into all the stats and not just the counting numbers, not in basketball, just the points per game
Hmm.
and rebounds per game, or in football. You have to vote for linemen. I want to actually study the lineman stats, and you can find stats if you want to look hard. I
Yeah.
didn't get a sense from the people who would end up getting, first and second team in the various things I voted for that there were always other people who they would kind of just vote for the best players on the top 25 teams or whatever the case may be. And so, I decided if it's not going to be taken seriously, which I don't think it is, I don't want to be a part of that. Now, I
Right.
think that the Baseball Writers Association of America, because baseball is a game with, baseball stats are, for the most part, we have some new stats we can look at now, but you can compare guys today to Ted Williams or Joe DiMaggio or Mickey Mantle and have a
Hmm.
have a lot of similarities. So we can do a approximation from 100 years ago,
Hmm.
and come up with some things. And I think baseball writers generally take it pretty seriously as far as that goes. Maybe too seriously, but they
Right.
take it pretty seriously. And so, yeah, but that's my thinking. I don't vote on these things anymore because I just don't think that, I don't know that the writers do the job that they're supposed to do. So I don't want to be a part of something like that.
Well, and then also figure into it too. I had to sit there yesterday, and during the time that Johnny Bench had been up at the table, and we were talking to him right before the race, I did a search to kind of find out what are some of the things that you are voted into the Baseball Hall of Fame for. Not only just your stats and so forth, but yes, it's how you conduct yourself, how you conduct yourself outside the sport, or how you conduct yourself while you're playing the sport as well. And in that case, you look at it, even though there's been this free for all, and nobody, like I said, nobody asked Johnny Bench this question yesterday. And I'm sure it's probably one of those times of where Rose is probably, or I should say, Bench is probably still grieving over Rose and everything over the loss of him. But technically, from the way that it's all put down from Cooperstown, yeah, Rose shouldn't make it into the Hall of Fame. But if you look at his stats, that's where, to me, I mean, his playing ability, his stats, his longevity, yeah, he deserves to be in there. But baseball writers still look at that thing of the morality part. But I wonder how many baseball players got into the Hall of Fame with question marks about their morality and what they did outside or what they did while they were playing the sport, that they still managed to get in, but they kind of got slipped under the rug, so to speak, in a way that we just won't look at that. I've wondered that.
To me, it's not a Hall of Fame without Pete Rose in it. And at this,
Right.
to me, also, it's not a Hall of Fame without Roger Clemens or Barry Bonds. All three guys cheated in various ways, but I don't know that the cheating, well, certainly in Pete's case, it didn't make because
Hmm.
it was after his base playing career was over.
Right.
And it wasn't even, he bet on his team. It's stupid. It's a rule. You're not supposed to do that.
Hmm.
You're not supposed to bet on baseball in general. But it shouldn't tarnish his playing career. And in the case of Clemens and Bonds, yeah, they took performance enhancing drugs, and so did 90% of baseball for the time they played.
Hmm.
Um, a steroid does. If I took steroids, it wasn't going to make me a better. I wasn't going to be a player. I wasn't going to win seven Cy Youngs
No.
or a bunch of batting titles. So I mean, you still got to have the talent and skill out there, and it's not a Hall of Fame without the best players in it. And Pete Rose,
Right.
He's the hit king.
Yep.
Barry Bonds is a he's a I don't like Barry, and nobody likes Barry Bonds, but he's the home
Right.
run king. I don't like that he's the home run king, but he's the home run king. Roger
Hmm.
Clemens, he did a lot of great things, and he was a great pitcher. And he came back, and so yeah, you could put an asterisk beside it. You can put an explanation on the plaque. But to pretend like they're not the best, Alex Red,
Right.
to pretend like they're not among the best players in baseball history, Ty Cobb jumped in the stands and beat up a crippled guy,
Yes.
and was a horrible racist on top of that.
Hmm.
Uh, there are lots of people, the book Ball 4, which I'm a huge fan of, the Jim Bouton book. Jim Bouton passed away a few years ago. I've read that book 3 or 4 times. It's such a good book.
Hmm.
It ripped the lid off of what goes on behind the scenes in baseball. That's why he was made a pariah in baseball for all these
Yeah.
years. But you learned that Hall of Famers like Whitey Ford and Mickey Mantle had their
Yep.
problems with scruples. So
Hmm.
whatever, okay, look, they weren't saints, but we enjoyed them for what we were supposed to enjoy them for out there on the field. They did great stuff. The stats don't lie, and I think baseball writers get a little too moral, high in the seat or whatever else you want to say as far as this kind of thing goes. They think they're the moral gatekeepers. No, let's keep if we can't keep Ty Cobb out, if we can't keep some other people out, let's just put them in based on their play and then put an asterisk beside it and say, yeah, there's questions about this guy. He used performance enhancing drugs, or he bet on baseball, or he womanized, or whatever
Hmm.
the case may be. But in the case of Kurt Schilling, Kurt Schilling is a horrible trumper. But so what? He has his stats are Hall of Fame stats.
Hmm.
And he had a tremendous postseason record. There's no way to keep him out of the Hall of Fame except for that he is just a horrible person. He's just a
Well,
horrible person, but he should be
you
in Hall
know,
of Fame.
well, and I go back too, and I think, and let's get back to the NASCAR thing here real
Yeah, sure,
quick.
sure.
In the Hall of Fame, there were people that asked me, why in the world did I support Wendell Scott going into the Hall of Fame?
Uh-huh.
I remember there was a play-by-play guy with a local station. He got on Facebook one day. Oh, he ripped me because of the fact he said, "You're just supporting him because of race." No, I wasn't supporting him because of race or anything like that. He was a damn good driver, was what he was. And I mean, in the sense of going back and looking, and I have to say this, you look at Jim Crow South, and then you look at the way things were, the odds were against him. The odds were against him in any way possible because here he was. He was black. He was a car driver, a stock car driver. He made his living off of driving a cab around Danville and around Pennsylvania County and things like that, and hauling people. But during his time that he was a racer, he was always a contender in a race. He worked on his own cars. He did everything the way that it was supposed to be, the way that it used to be. And to keep him out because technically he won so many races, but he was never recognized out of it because he didn't have, his stats, they shouldn't count or anything like that. Bullcrap. I mean, his stats should count. I mean, he had a heck of a time when he was racing. It's just a shame that race has to be made an issue out of this whole thing. And I know that I was just tickled to no end when he finally made the Hall of Fame. I think it was like first or second time around the ballot or something for the Hall of Fame in NASCAR. But there are going to be those people that's going to be out there that's going to throw that sort of thing out at you and say, yeah, he doesn't deserve to be in there. And then let's look back at baseball here for just a second. To me, I think baseball, very in a lot of ways, very hypocritical about this whole thing. Here they are, and they say we don't want our players betting on baseball, but yet they're not denying that they accept some of the biggest checks probably in advertising and support from some of these outfits like Bally's and some of these other places, and especially all the gaming people right now. And
Yeah, yeah.
it's out there, and it's like, well, hey, why quote me this when you're saying, oh, it's okay for the fan to go and do it, but okay, so the guy's got a problem or the guy's got an issue. Seek help for the guy. At least try to help the guy out. And that's what, in some ways, I think they should have done with Rose. I think they should have pulled him off to the side and said, hey, you're on the verge of getting thrown out of this game. We need to clean your image up, and we need to clean you up big time to where this doesn't pose a problem for you for the future. But they didn't do it. They were out for him from the get go. That's the way I feel about with Pete Rose. I feel like baseball was out for him, and they made him the whipping boy out of this whole thing. And it's kind of like same thing with Roger Clemens, with all these others, and so forth. Barry Bonds. They're kind of becoming the whipping boy out of this whole thing for performance enhancement drugs and things. Folks, let's just throw that stuff out. I mean, look at the stats. Look what they did. Same thing as with Wendell Scott. Look what he did when he was on the track. He was just a hell of a driver. Any way you look at it, he was a hell of a driver.
With Pete, he was a guy that was so driven and competitive, over competitive, hyper competitive. He
Right.
ran through Ray Fosse in the All-Star game.
Yep.
That it's hard to turn that off. And it's not, it sounds like an excuse and it's not because Pete had a lot of issues, but
Hmm.
they could have gotten him help and instead, threw him away. And then, of course I cover the wrestling business too, as a journalist from time to time. The stories that are about around the wrestling business, Pete agreed a couple times to be involved with the WrestleMania spectacles back in the late 80s, early 90s.
Hmm.
He once famously took a tombstone pile driver from The Undertaker. That year, WrestleMania was being held at one of those resorts. I want to say it's the one in Connecticut, the Mohegan Sun. Um,
Hmm.
he basically got a check for $10,000 to take, to come in the ring and take that tombstone pile driver. Of course, it's a very carefully orchestrated move. You don't get
Hmm.
hurt, but you sell it and you make you look like you're like dying out there. He basically took the check, cashed it, and gambled it.
Yeah. Well,
I mean, so they could have helped him. They didn't help him, and
yeah.
I'm not saying that he's beyond it too, and you got to get your self help. But if he was still out there trying to play for a chance, he's working for a chance to get back in baseball or stay in baseball.
Yeah.
Maybe he treats it differently. But yeah, they threw him away, and he's a guy that he was baseball. He was
Yeah.
Charlie Hustle. He the pictures of him diving it's into
Hmm.
bases and he was the hit king and all that stuff. I mean, yeah, him and I love your Wendell Scott story. I made when you were talking about that, I just looked up Jackie Robinson. I was thinking, Jackie Robinson only played 10 years in the major leagues.
Hmm.
And there might have been some people to say, well, Jackie Robinson, Hall of Fame. Um, his stats would have probably been Hall of Fame. They were on the lower level of Hall of Fame. But
Hmm.
on top of that, he was the first first player to, to
Yeah.
break the color. He was the guy who broke the color barrier.
Yeah.
Just like Wendell Scott and you on top of what you did, you had all the extra pressure of being the one guy
Hmm.
to have to break a color barrier, and that's hard. It makes it it makes it 100 times, a million times harder to do the job. And so whatever they did, yes. And so you fought that fight. Congratulations to you for doing that. And I happen to think Jackie Robinson is the most important athlete of maybe American history, just because of what he
Yeah.
did. It started everything else in terms of color barriers being broken. So. Um, well, what a good discussion. We didn't think we'd get into this talking
No,
about.
I didn't. I didn't. I mean, it was interesting, but it kind of goes to show you in a way how much it seems like baseball and NASCAR are becoming intertwined a little bit more, especially before this Speedway Classic coming up in August. A lot of people wouldn't think this, but they've got the same questions out there about what kind of players, who makes the Hall of Fame, who does this, who's your big names that's out there, and of course Johnny Bench mentioned Dale Earnhardt, and what do we think of when we hear Dale Earnhardt? We immediately think, hey, NASCAR. That's what we think of. Richard Petty, same thing. Um, it's pretty big. And then there was a name mentioned yesterday, kind of out of the clear blue, about the Kyle Larson and Denny Hamlin sort of deal that they're having. How many times they finished 1-2 or something in a race here? I think it's been like 7 times or something here in the last little bit. And there were people mentioning in the infield and also on the broadcast that said this could be or is very close to becoming the next Richard Petty, David Pearson sort of feud back and forth in the sport, which in reality they never had a feud or anything, but it was just a constant competition between Petty and Pearson. And Pearson was one of those hard driving drivers that went out there and had a point to prove. every week. That's what he wanted to do. And it's just interesting how all this is kind of, we've gone with this Johnny Bench into this thing about baseball. And now we're coming back and we're kind of twisting back around the way that, baseball and the way that NASCAR, and they're kind of intertwined with this, and especially coming up before August 2nd.
Rivalries make sports, whether it be Richard Petty, Pearson, Yankees, Dodgers, Steelers, Cowboys,
Mm-hmm.
UNC Duke in basketball. Rivalries sell tickets. Rivalries are what get us, even those of us who aren't diehards of either one. We just want to see who wins. So
Yeah.
that'd be great for NASCAR if that was the case. Well, we got the weekend off, right?
Yep.
Not until the 27th at Talladega, so the drivers and
Right.
teams get a chance to get a breather and then get back out on the track. And you get a breather too. You need one after this weekend, right?
Yeah, this weekend I do, and let's mention too, it's coming up before Sunday though, but they're going to have the truck race, and they're going to also have the Xfinity Series race
Okay.
at Rockingham this coming weekend. So it won't be on Easter Sunday, but they're having a race I think on Friday night, and then they're having a race on Saturday, and both of those kind of like for the rebirth of Rockingham, so to speak. And if you're wondering about COVID funds and wondering about this stuff about where money supposedly went in North Carolina, well, they put a major league injection of money into bringing back Rockingham. The same thing, I think, with North Wilkesboro, too, to kind of help it out. And Rockingham, they say it's going to be a treat to watch. So I'm going to spend some time this weekend watching the truck race and the Xfinity race, and I want to see how well this track has aged and how well it's been brought back after being off the circuit for such a long period of time.
Well, good news. We'll look forward to your coverage of that. We'll share that here. I know you'll share it on Dickinson Media as well.
Mhm.
And then we'll get back to our talking about that next week and getting folks ready for Talladega when we get back together next week. Well, Rod, as always, thank you for your time and your insight. It was great talking with you today.
Appreciate it, Chris. Thanks.